My name is Ken Dibert, Tech Service Rep with BASF here in eastern North Dakota and northwest Minnesota. So happy to be here today. Absolutely thrilled. We're so excited to be launching a new white mold fungicide offering in dry beans, soybeans, and canola. And I can't think of a better place to be kicking this product off other than here at the Dry Bean and Sugarbeet Expo. So appreciate you guys coming in to give us a chance to share some information with you here today. So I know the agenda said Eric Garcia. Eric was unable to be with us here today, so I'm going to do my best to go through his slide deck here. But again, my name is Ken Dibert. So obviously a brand new offering here for dry beans in terms of white mold control. I tell you what, one of the reasons why we're so excited, it's been 22 plus years since we've launched a new fungicide for white mold control in dry beans. And so obviously Endura in the past, many of you are very familiar with that brand. Really we used Endura as our benchmark to launch into this Zorina platform. And I'll tell you a little bit about those details here in just a minute. But just to kind of set the stage, I mentioned dry bean. Obviously that's one of the reasons why we're here talking about this product today. Soybean and canola will also be on the label. One thing you're gonna notice, a significant difference from where we've been with Endura in the past is this Zorina formulation is going to be a liquid product. Okay, it's going to be a SC or a suspension concentrate formulation, so a liquid formulation. And obviously we're going to be talking about multiple AIs here as well, not just one. I'll go into the details here in just a minute. So with that, before I get into those details, I want to just kind of paint the picture. And again, a perfect opportunity to be talking about white mold here at the Dry Bean Expo. But when I think of diseases like white mold, I think of one of the most significant diseases in our geography here in North Dakota, for that matter, across the state, especially here in the east and northern Minnesota. White mold in a variety of broadleaf crops to include dry bean. I think of Cercospora leaf spot. I also think of head scab in cereals. I think of those three diseases as very, very aggressive, invasive diseases. And obviously here with white mold, in the dry bean picture, soybeans, for example, it clearly led the above ground disease yield loss in all of the outlying states. Obviously we're not alone in the northern plains here. There are other states in the Midwest that have white mold as well. Cost U.S. growers over $260 million annually. So very significant disease, aggressive disease. There's a reason why we care a lot about controlling white mold, especially in a crop that obviously like dry beans, that's very susceptible to this devastating disease, okay? So I'll give you an idea of also what type of conditions white mold favors. Obviously it relatively speaking, it prefers cooler temps, okay? And I think about some of the warmer temps that we get into above the canopy here at head height, for example, during the season. That doesn't necessarily mean it's that warm low in the canopy where we're trying to control this disease. So again, that 46 to 70 degree temperatures, obviously white mold prefers. High humidity. I think about 2025, not only the amount of rainfall that we had at various parts of the season, but also just humidity. Any free moisture that is available to that disease, obviously it's going to thrive in. A dense canopy. You're going to hear me talk about the optimum time to apply a product like Zorina is going to be at row closure, okay? And really that's part of that disease triangle, creating that conducive environment. A field history, whether we're growing dry beans in the past, soybeans, sunflower, canola, all of these very susceptible broadleaf crops. If you have a history of any of those crops in your dry bean rotation, there's a really good chance that you're going to see white mold developing in that crop. Susceptible varieties, obviously we're talking about a susceptible crop here with dry beans. You know, excessive fertilization, you know, obviously any free moisture that crop, that canopy is going to endure is a really conducive environment for a disease like white mold. So the first question you're going to ask, okay, this is a new product. What's in this new product? So really, it starts with Endura fungicide. That's kind of our tried and true boscalid, the active ingredient in that one. that we've had around for, like I said, over 22 years here in dry beans. Now we have the opportunity to add another active ingredient that especially those of you in sugar beet acres may recognize in Provosol. And so Provosol plus Endura is going to equal Zorina moving forward. That's going to be our high power premix here that contains two different FRAC codes now, a group 3 or a triazole in Provosol, and a group 7 or an SDHI in Endura. Okay? So kind of give you an idea here, because you might be also thinking, well, we really haven't been talking about Provosol with white mold control in the past. It's really been about Endura. We by design haven't positioned this product alone on white mold. It's not, I wouldn't call it a standalone white mold active ingredient. However, nothing new to the triazole or the group 3, FRAC code 3 group. There are others in that group in the industry that also have very good white mold activity. And you put a couple Provosol with Endura, it's going to complement Endura in that white mold activity. I'll give you an example of this. We have 3 different premixes up here, 2 competitive products here on the left, and what we're showing is a magnified under a microscope showing that hyphae production, which is ultimately going to lead to that mycelium production, which is the white cottony structures or appearance that we call white mold on the surface of these plants, whether it's on the stems, pods, etc. And then we have Zorina here on the right. And this is singling out the group 3s or the triazoles that are included in these 3 respective premixes. Goes to show right there that Provosol, that group 3 active ingredient, does a very good job of stopping that hyphae, ultimately mycelium production in that plant. Now Endura does just the, complements that, sort of just the opposite. It does a very good job of stopping that sporulation or that spore production on the leaf surface, okay? So give you an idea that what that Provosol piece is bringing. Here's a collection of some ratings. This is from the 2024 ratings of the Crop Protection Network. This is a group of university extension personnel essentially across the US, okay? And what we're showing here is obviously the products that are really listed primarily in this white mold space. You can see Zorina there, clear on the right. Also notice the FRAC codes, right? A lot of group 3s, a lot of group 7s, okay? Even a couple of group 11s in there, and then their respective active ingredients. And then finally at the bottom shows how this crop protection network is rating these respective brands. You can see Endura, as expected, and many of you have great experience with that product, got a very good rating on white mold control. We expect Zorina to be very good and plus, right? We're here to advance that white mold production, or protection rather, with Zorina. So improved performance. One of the things that we talked a lot about in other crops, one being sugar beet, but also in potatoes, for example, when we launched Provosol, is broader, stronger, longer protection. That's one thing that this group 3 or our triazole and Provosol brings to this mix, is a little bit longer protection, helps with that overall protection. So what we did here to demonstrate that, we have a total combined leaf surface and uptake. We collectively collected essentially the active ingredient on that leaf surface, and also what was taken up, I call it locally systemic in that plant or those leaves of that soybean plant in this case. But after 7 days, you can see that we recovered over 80% of those AIs, okay? Obviously the Provosol piece and the Endura piece that makes up Zorina. And this is after 7 days. We fast forward to 21 days. Now I'm gonna stop right there. I wanna be very clear on this. We're not necessarily saying that Zorina, that we're gonna wait 3 weeks or 21 days to make the next fungicide application, especially in the case where we're making 2 for white mold, but just goes to show that we can have a significant amount of protection 3 weeks out, even on an aggressive disease like white mold. So pretty impressive there. And I know the Provosol piece is complementing Endura in this AI recovery. So another thing we want to talk about, UV stability or lack of photodegradation, because we know that there are many AIs, fungicides and herbicides alike that tend to get broken down, some very quickly, by UV light, okay? Sunlight, when they're obviously exposed on that leaf surface, on the stem of the plant. So what we did here is, obviously we're demonstrating we've got a very stable product, a very stable formulation under these various environmental stresses to include sunlight. And here again, the numbers were showing that over a set amount of time, we still were able to recover 86% of that AI that we applied. Knowing that your investment, that fungicide investment for white mold control is still going to be there after it's exposed to the sunlight over a period of time. So very, very strong attributes that we're bringing here in this premix. We did a lot of work. We do a lot of work with North Dakota State, for example, Dr. Michael Vunch, which I'll show a video here in a minute. We'll go through some of the timings, but these are some of the snapshots, some of the beauty shots, if you will, that we took in dry bean, soybean, canola. And all of these sets of photos, obviously we have an untreated plant on the left, treated on the right, and very strong performance. And I think that'll show up in the data that I'll show here in a minute as well. So use rate, and we have a booth here literally right around the first aisle here, right around the curtain. And I encourage you guys to stop by and pick up some literature that will have all of this information as well to really outline that timing. And I'll say timing, because it's absolutely critically important for a successful white mold application. But for dry beans, the 20-ounce use rate is going to be our lead use rate. And you're going to notice, depending on the crop, much like we did with Endura, the rate will be dependent upon the crop, okay? So again, 20 ounces will be our lead rate in dry beans. I'm gonna talk specifically, or I'm gonna let Michael talk about it here in a minute in the video, on this R2 or full bloom timing. And obviously if that canopy closes earlier, we're gonna move that timing up just a bit. One thing I haven't talked about yet, by adding that Provosol piece, we're not only controlling white mold, but we're expanding our disease spectrum, our control. We're also going to control dry bean rust. In many years, depending on the environment, depending on that season, we can see rust, dry bean rust come into this bean crop, can be very devastating as well. By adding that Provosol piece, we're able to control not only white mold, but dry bean rust as well. That's certainly something that we couldn't say in the past with Endura and where we've been with that product, okay? So obviously labeled ground, air, chemigation. We list 10 gallons up here. I would prefer 20 gallons, right? The more water volume, the better. You'll see on our label, there'll be a rate, GPA rate range of 10 to 20 gallons. So the higher, the better. No question about it. Is labeled by air as well. So a little bit more about this timing. We'll kind of explain this. Some of our literature does a good job of explaining this as well, but we want to really look at that 20-ounce rate of Zorina and dry beans. When 100% of those plants reach that pin pod, okay, when those small, tiny pods develop right where that flower was present on that dry bean plant, as soon as you see those pin pods develop at the very lowest portion of the canopy, that's our trigger to make these applications. And that often coincides with, again, that early R2 and row closure timing in dry beans. If the canopy closes earlier, because we certainly need that closed canopy to form that disease triangle, obviously we need that moisture present, we need that host, we need the pathogen in order for white mold to take off. And if that canopy closes earlier, we're gonna move those applications up just a bit. Okay, so also got Dan Malice pictured here. Dan's somewhere here as well in the back. Dan is my counterpart, tech service rep in the western part of North Dakota. And Dan and Michael are gonna lead us off in some discussion, some very important discussion around the critical timing, once again, of these white mold applications. So take a listen here.
Here with Dr. Bunch, looking at dry bean and where we start looking for an application for white mold.
Okay, so there have been two lines of thinking for white mold applications in dry beans. Some growers have traditionally gone out and sprayed when they see 30 to 50 or maybe 70% of plants with these initial blossoms. Some growers have waited until a majority of plants have initial pin pods. So the moment the blossom senesces, the blossom dries up and sometimes remains attached to the plant, but often drops, and a little baby dry bean pod develops. We call that a pin pod because it's pin-shaped. So the line of thinking for white mold has always been either you spray at early bloom, 30, 50% of plants with open blossoms, or you wait until the majority of plants have one or more of these little pin-shaped pods. In our testing conducted under conditions favoring white mold as the dry beans have entered bloom, we have found that you want to wait until some of your plants have these initial pin-shaped pods. If you're going to do a single application of fungicide targeting white mold, you do it when about 50% to even 60-70% of plants have these initial pin-shaped pods when conditions favor white mold. If you're going to do 2 sequential applications, that first application needs to go on usually at 10 to 30% of plants with these initial pin pods, sometimes up to 50% if that canopy is quite open, but not later. And there is a penalty to applying too late because you cannot cure existing infections, but there's also a penalty to going on too early. When you spray at 30% of plants with initial blossom, there are typically no pin pods. And when you're spraying at that time, you are protecting the growth that's there and not the new growth. And because the new growth is not protected, there is a penalty to going on too early. And our dry beans put on vigorous growth at that initial bloom period. So timing is very critical, and you want to wait till those initial pin pods are out before you spray, but you do not wait until you have 100% of plants with pin pods if conditions favor white mold, because by then you will have infections already and you cannot cure those. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense to everybody? I mean, I think it helps for us to walk through these recommendations, because as Michael will say himself, white mold is very complicated, right? It can also be related to cercospora and sugar beets. These are not easy to control diseases. They're very complex, very complicated, and that timing is so critical. And I heard at least one of the speakers earlier today talking about that critical timing, row closure for cercospora and sugar beets. Well, in white mold, no different. That timing is absolutely critical. And that I can remember not many years ago, we were just talking about flowering dry beans and we're going to make these fungicide applications. Well, what does that mean? I think this helps kind of qualify that recommendation a little bit more. So certainly if you're looking for more information on this, North Dakota State does a great job of publishing these results. Go to their website, visit with your local retailer and or BASF rep. We'd be glad to help clarify some of these recommendations, because our fungicide, white mold fungicide products are only going to be as successful as that timing of that application. So can't stress that enough. So furthermore, at North Dakota State, just looking at some of the data here, Zorina on the right, and we're looking at yield here in pounds per acre compared to some of the other products we've had in some of these trials. This was the 2024 data. Zorina appears to be performing very well. Even when we compare it to one of our own in Endura, kind of our benchmark or really the gold standard in white mold protection, been performing very well against these various brands. And so again, here, just turning the page, this is the 2025 data. Again, Zorina compared to a couple other brands in that market. And all of these, you'll notice they have an AB by the data. Should have mentioned that on the last slide too. Tremendous pressure, and also irrigated dry beans in this case with the North Dakota State work. The pressure is very, very strong, right? Almost to the point where might be borderline unrealistic compared to the commercial setting, but not always, right? Obviously it depends on the year a bit, but we have some very strong pressure in these trials, and good to know, good peace of mind to know that Zorina is standing up there very well in this data. Here, furthermore, just a few pictures demonstrating that control as well compared to the untreated check. You'll notice quickly in the untreated where you're seeing more of those stems without leaves. where the leaves have either, plant has begun to wilt, and some of those leaves will eventually fall off on those wilted and infected plants. Here again, another close-up shot, Zorina there on the right versus the untreated. And again, a very common picture, whether it's in a commercial dry bean field, soybean, for example, or a small plot, replicated plot scenario, we see these very similar results. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up and give just a few minutes or a couple minutes here for questions. But as the slide says here, I think it's time for a new white mold control solution, and we couldn't be happier to bring the dry bean producers a new white mold offering. Like I said, it's been well over 20 years, over 22 years since BASF has had the opportunity to bring a new white mold offering forward into the marketplace. And we got a good one here, again, a liquid formulation. And remember, it's not just about white mold, it's about controlling dry bean rust as well with this product. And we're very excited about this opportunity, and hopefully you guys will as well. So we have a minute just for questions.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes.
Good. Any questions? Yes.
You had mentioned about water volume. But on one of the slides, you had 30 psi in application. Can you just address droplet size and how it's going to get to where you need it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll repeat the question too. It's hard to hear these. So first part of the question was about PSI or spray nozzle pressure. Talked about volume, water volume a little bit, but ultimately that droplet size that we're seeking. And I'm gonna throw a disclaimer out here before I even get into this. You guys heard Dr. Wunsch speak here. I joke with him here recently that he's becoming the nozzle expert for these white mold applications as well, because he's starting to do more work around droplet size. And so again, go to his work for these specifics, but I'll generalize it for you. So basically, he's looked at it two different ways. He'll call it let's call it a 75 to 80% canopy closure. So we know we've got air or daylight, if you will, between those rows. And he will also say to that point that these finer droplets, say a fine to medium-sized droplet, is okay in that open canopy. But what is one of the things I just mentioned that is more conducive to white mold production and infection is a closed canopy, right? So then he's also done a lot of work with these closed canopies. So maybe it's a 90 to 98, maybe 100% canopy closure. He'll also say that we need a little bit larger droplet, right? One with some velocity. Obviously, spray pressure is going to help in those scenarios as well, because he talked about those pin pods. And when we want to start those applications is when we see those little tiny pods developing at those lowest flower points, right? That are low on the stem, not up here, right? A lot different in a crop like canola where we got the flowers up at the top of the plant. And when you got that closed canopy, that's when you need a little bit larger droplet, a little bit higher pressure to drive some of those droplets in. And we have a lot of distribution partners, for example, some of them here today. There are a lot of products that can help from these folks get those droplets the right size, first off, optimal droplet size, but also deposition aids that can help get these droplets into that canopy. Because full canopy protection is ultimately the key. Not just at the top of the plant, not even just at the bottom, but we want to protect as much of that plant up and down the stem as possible. So excellent question. That leads right into this white mold fungicide application timing, and I would put right there, right with it, is selecting the right droplet size for these applications.
Can I add another question to that? So you've got it as both aerial and ground, of course, we like aerial, but it's really hard to get a big coarse droplet aerial. So
Yep.
can you address, is there any difference between aerial applied and ground?
Yeah.
You already got it.
I'll do my best to repeat the question. So the question was ground versus air. Obviously, it can be difficult. Aerial application, different ballgame, right? I mean, it can be a little bit more difficult, maybe to achieve that precise droplet size that we're looking for. I will never claim to be an aerial application expert in how we get there. I know a lot of the work virtually much of the work that's been done has been by ground applications. Not to say that aerial applications wouldn't work, because there's a time and a place for each of these, and I just know that a lot of the work done to date has been by ground, and we've had great success there. So, good question. Any other questions from the group?
All right, let's thank Ken. Ken, you'll be around for a little while?
Absolutely. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. Stop by the booth for some literature.